breakfast.
So, bro,
I just explained this. If you didn't listen,
your food rule is gonna change now.
No more food.
okay.
And just for like
Okay, so first, factoring. The negative 5 can't do anything. The bottom you can take out a 2. So then x-intercept. We've been through this a lot. If you guys know how to do this, you are good for the first half of this test, probably the first 2/3 of this test. But if you don't, you're going to be in trouble. How do we find an x-intercept? The top equal to 0. Does negative 5 equal 0? No, so there is none. How do we find a y-intercept? All the x's equal to 0. So we get negative 5/4. How do we find a vertical asymptote? The bottom equal to 0. So x equals negative 2. Half the x equals. Horizontal or oblique, we divide the highest powers of x. When I do that, we have negative 5 over 2x. Anytime x ends on the bottom, what does that mean? Horizontal, y equals 0. Alright, so if we draw our graph, everything you found you need to plot. Intercepts are points, we don't cross the x-axis. Y is at negative 5/4. Vertical asymptote, negative 2. Horizontal at 0. Nothing was squared, so we don't have any weird bounces like we saw in that one graph yesterday. So this section would be down here. For this section, we just need to put in a test point. So if we plug in negative 3, we get negative 5 over 2 times negative 1, so negative 2, which is 5/2. So that's up here. So this section looks like that. Is that okay? So first step, factor. On the top, you have to start by taking out an x. Bottom, you can do difference of squares. So then on the top, multiply 2 and add to 3 would be plus 2 and plus 1. What do you see? So this turns into x times x plus 2 over x minus 1. That's what we'll use for our graph. Because it cancels, we have a hole. The x, what made x plus 1 equal 0? Negative 1. If you plug negative 1 into what's left, we get negative 1 over negative 2, so positive 1/2. X-intercept. How do we find x-intercept? When the top is 0. So that is at 0 and negative 2. Y-intercept, what do we do? All the x's equal to 0 and we get 0. Vertical asymptote is the bottom equal to 0, so x equals 1. Horizontal or oblique, we divide the highest powers of x. You can do it from this reduced one or the original, it does not matter. If you do this, you have x squared over x. If you did the original, x cubed over x squared. Both of those reduce to an x. If you're left with x, what does that mean? X is on top, it's an oblique asymptote. We have to do long division. It does not matter if you do the original or your reduced one. So if I think most people were working with the original one when I answered questions. You're welcome if you want to put a 0x in here. You don't have to. It's just to help everything line up. So we went through the division yesterday. And it's really just like if you are going to go do long division with numbers. If I said 235 divided by 7. Okay, you start off with 23 divided by 7, right? So we're starting off here. X cubed divided by x squared, which is x. Okay, if you were doing this, 23 divided by 7, it goes 3 times. And then what do you do? Okay, 3 times 7 is 21. So here I'm going to multiply x. X times x squared is x cubed. X times 0x is 0x squared. X times -1 is -x. And once you get that, you subtract it off. So we are going to subtract now. Distribute our negative. So those cancel. You get 3x squared plus 3x. So what is 3x squared divided by x squared? 3. So our oblique is y equals x plus 3. Now we have all of our information. So we draw our graph. The whole is an open circle. We have 1, 1/2. If the x-axis at 0 and -2, y-axis at 0. Vertical asymptote 1. Oblique, y equals x plus 3. So you start at 3. Slope is 1, so up 1 over 1. Alright, my x-intercepts, neither one was squared, so it's not doing any bouncing or anything. So we can tell this section would look like that. We have to have something on both sides of the vertical asymptote. That's to the left, so to figure out what it's doing to the right, if we plug in a -2, we'll get, or sorry, not -2, +2. We get 2 times 4 over 1, which is 8, so that section's up here. And so our graph should look something like that. Any questions there? So, do you guys feel pretty confident on the graphic stuff? Yes.
How do you know whether it bounces or not?
If it has a square. So it's only the x-intercepts that might bounce. And if like this had had a square on it, it would have bounced at the -2. So your test tomorrow, you know, I told you you'll have probably 3 or 4 graphs on it. So you'll have several of those. You'll also have some questions like the front page where you're just using your asymptote rules. So there'll be quite a few questions involving this stuff because we spent quite a bit of time on it. Then we went into equations and inequalities. So I put 4 of each on here. There'll probably be 3 of each one on your test. Test's usually a little bit shorter, so probably 3 equations, 3 inequalities. Your equations, the first 4, so those are the equal sign. A should be no solution. B is -1. C is -2. D, you get 4 and -16. Would you like, which of those equations would you like? Take a look at those. The first thing I told you on these equations was to factor your denominator. Because you want to make life as easy as you can. You don't want any extra stuff. So multiply to 8 and add to 6. That would be a 2 and a 4. Alright, you don't have to write it down, but you have to check it at the end, so I try to make a habit of thinking about it early. What can x not be? And why is that? Those are what makes the denominators. Okay, so now we try to get rid of the fraction. So this one has an x plus 2. So everything, each term gets multiplied by x plus 2. When I do that, I can see those cancel and these cancel. I still have fractions though, so I'm not done. This one has an x plus 4. So everything has to get multiplied by an x plus 4. Those cancel. So what I am left with is 2 times the x plus 4 plus 1 times the x plus 2 equals 4. Are we okay here? So now if we multiply it out, we get 2x plus 8 plus x plus 2 equals 4. So that's 3x plus 10 equals 4. Subtract the 10, divide by 3, and we get negative 2. But at the beginning we said x can't be negative 2, so it's no solution. Alright, C. So we have 2x plus 1 over x minus 2. We have 3 over x. And over here it's a negative 6. If you factor the denominator, you can take out an x, so x minus 2. So right now, what can x not equal? 2 and 0. Okay. If I want to get rid of this denominator, everything has to get multiplied by x minus 2. These cancel, and those cancel. What's left on the bottom? X. So everything has to get multiplied by a plain x. Those cancel and these cancel. So what we're left with is 2x plus 1 times x, 3 times x minus 2, and negative 6. So if we distribute, it's 2x squared plus 4x. If we add over the 6, those cancel. So we can factor out a 2x. If we set those equal to 0, 2x equals 0 gives me x equals 0. X plus 2 equals 0, we get negative 2. Are both of those answers okay? No, we said at the beginning x can't be 0 or 2, so the 0 is out, and negative 2 is the only solution that works. D. So 6 over x plus 8 plus 6 over x minus 8 equals negative 1. So what can x not equal? So to get rid of x plus 8, everything gets multiplied by an x plus 8. That cancels this, but I still have a fraction, so now everything needs x minus 8. So over here we have negative 1. What would you have to do with the x plus 8, x minus 8? FOIL. So that's x squared minus 64. Then we have 6x minus 48 plus 6x plus 48 equals negative x squared plus 64. Positive and negative 48 cancel. If I add over my x squared, that's a positive x squared. 6 plus 6 is 12x. Subtract my 64. Now what? Okay, we just need to factor. What multiplies to negative 64 and adds to positive 12?
Also 16.
So if you set those equal to 0, you get negative 16 and positive 4. The only things that wouldn't work are positive, negative, 8, so those are fine. Alright, so are we good with the equations? Our strategy, factor the denominators, multiply to cancel them out, and then check at the end and make sure your denominator doesn't equal 0. The inequalities, E should be negative 4/7 to negative 1/2 with parentheses. F, negative infinity to negative 5 with a parenthesis, union bracket 1/3 to infinity. G, parenthesis 1, comma 4 with a bracket. And H, negative infinity to negative 3/2 with parenthesis, union bracket negative 1/2 to infinity.
What'd you say?
So if we look at F, our goal with the inequalities, so if it has a less than or a greater than, we can't multiply by the denominator. So we want everything on one side, 0 on the other. So we're actually set up to go ahead and start our sign line from here. Once you have that, you set top and bottom equal to 0. So we get positive 1/3, negative 5. So then we do our sign line. Small to large. Test points, smaller than negative 1/3, negative 1 in between the two, maybe a 0, and bigger than 5, maybe a 6. We are plugging these in to this fraction, trying to decide if it's positive or negative. So if I put in a negative 1, negative 3 minus 1 is negative, negative 1 plus 5 is positive, negative and positive is negative. If I put in a 0, 0 minus 1 is negative, 0 plus 5 is positive, a negative, and a positive is negative. Did I mess up here?
Shouldn't the 5 be negative?
Yeah, I had a negative 5 and I put a positive. Let me fix that. So, how about negative 5 and positive 1/3? I flipped the signs when I brought them over to my sign line. Okay, so we can still do 0, which gave us a negative. But now we need smaller than negative 5. Negative 6. So if I put in negative 6, we get a negative over a negative, which is positive. And then bigger than 1/3, maybe a positive 1. So we can get a positive over a positive, which is positive. I said greater than 0. Greater than is positive. So here are my positive sections. Equal to says bracket, but we know the bottom of a fraction can never equal 0. So it can't equal the negative 5 no matter what, but it can equal the 1/3. So negative infinity to negative 5, union bracket 1/3 to infinity. Is that one okay? G. So first we have to have 0 on one side. So if I subtract this over. Then I need this to be a single fraction. Lucky for us, they already have a common denominator, so we can just say 4 minus x over x minus 1. If they didn't, we would have to get a common denominator. So now we're ready to do our sign line. Top and bottom equal to 0 first. So we get a positive 4, positive 1. So test points, smaller than 1, in between 1 and 4, and bigger than 4. I'm putting them into this fraction. So 4 minus 0 is a positive number, 0 minus 1 is negative, so that section's negative. If I put in 2, 4 minus 2 is positive, 2 minus 1 is positive, 2 positives make a positive. If I put in a 5, 4 minus 5 is negative, 5 minus 1 is positive, negative and positive is negative. We wanted greater than, which means positives. Equal to says bracket, but we know the denominator can't have a bracket. So the 1 gets parentheses, the 4 gets the bracket. So it's 1 to 4.
Why does 4 get the bracket?
because it had an equal to 0, and that happens if the top of the fraction is 0. Other questions? And H. So we have to have 0, so we subtract over the 5. Okay, we need a common denominator. This is like 5 over 1. So what I'm going to have to do is multiply it by 3 plus 2x on top and bottom. So we have 10 over 3 plus 2x minus 15 plus 10x over 3 plus 2x. Because it's subtraction, distribute the negative. And if we combine like terms, we get negative 5 minus 10x over 3 plus 2x. So this is the fraction I'm using. And you set top and bottom equal to 0. So if we do that, we get negative 1/2 and negative 3. Everybody with me there? So test point, smaller than negative 3/2. So that's negative 1.5, so we could go with negative 2. In between the two, we could do a negative 1. And bigger, we could do a 0. So I put in a negative 2, I get negative 5 plus 20, so that's positive. 3 minus 4 is negative, so that section is negative. I put in a negative 1, negative 5 plus 10 is positive. 3 minus 2 is positive, so that section is positive. If I put in a 0, negative 5 minus 0 is negative, 3 plus 0 is positive, so that is negative. I wanted less than, which is negatives. Again, it had an equal to. Equal to tells me bracket, but the denominator gets a parenthesis no matter what. So my answer is negative infinity to negative 3/2 with a parenthesis. Union, bracket, negative 1/2.